I'm in the admin portal, and if I want to add in some additional licenses, I can click on Purchase Services and start purchasing the services for my users and assigning them to them. However, if I want to obtain some resources, not licenses, then I would need to go into the Azure portal at portal.azure.com. Resources are different than licenses for various different products in Microsoft 365. Resources include storage, virtual machines, databases, and other things such as that. I'm going to go ahead and choose a virtual machine. I'm going to create a virtual machine and make it available to people to be able to access remotely using Remote Desktop. So I'll click on Create. Now I have several options. The first is virtual machine. Another is a virtual machine scale set. So this is going to allow things like load balancing as well as batch management, multiple different options for syncing up virtual machines. Then I have presets. These are preset configured virtual machines that are going to have various different resources attached, such as RAM, CPU, CPU type, storage type, things like that. And then I have a hybrid option. So once again, pre-configured. This is going to be a kit for Linux and Windows for Azure Arc hybrid infrastructure. We go into Azure Arc in detail in this course. So I'm going to choose the virtual machine. Since I already have a subscription, you can see it shows the default subscription here. If you don't see one, you'll have to sign up for one before you can go ahead and get this virtual machine going. Now I need to have a resource group. So by default, there are no resource groups because this is a brand new account. So I need to create a new one. So I'll click on Create New. And I'll call it RG1 for Resource Group 1. Take a look at the right-hand side of the screen. It's starting to show what my estimated monthly costs are going to be. And every time I add in some additional resource, it's going to increase or decrease that cost depending if I add or decrease the amount of resources for it. Now I need to give it a virtual machine name. And I'll call this VM1. For virtual machine 1. And now I need to choose the location that's closest to me for the fastest response. Next, I can choose an availability zone. So if I choose an availability zone, you can see I've got the virtual machine scale set, which is going to distribute that virtual machine across zones and fault domains. And I've got the availability set, which is going to automatically distribute the virtual machines across multiple fault domains. But if we do this, you're going to see the cost go way up. So I'm going to choose the no infrastructure redundancy required because it's going to add a lot of cost to my virtual machine. Next, I need to choose an image. So I'll hit the drop down and you can see a lot of Linux, various different versions of Linux, as well as Windows servers. There's also an option for Windows 11 Pro as well, if you would like to add in a client instead. I'll choose the 2025 Data Center Azure Edition, 64-bit, of course. They're all 64-bit at this point. And now I need to come up with a username. Now, the username cannot be administrator. It has to be something else because administrator is something that's not unique into Azure. I've chosen WinAdmin, and you can see that it went ahead and passed all the requirements. Now I'm going to put in a password. You need to have at least 12 characters, and it cannot be an empty password. After adding the password in twice, we've got the option for public inbound ports. This is an important part for the AZ900 certification because you're going to need to know the different ways that people can access your virtual machine in Azure. So by default, it's going to allow RDP or Remote Desktop Protocol, which is a pretty common way of accessing a server. If I choose the drop-down, I also have the option for HTTP, HTTPS, and SSH. I'm just going to choose Remote Desktop because it is going to be the most common way of accessing. And I have the option for, do I have an existing server license? The answer is yes, I do have existing server licenses. But if you don't, just go ahead and leave that blank. Now I'm going to choose that, yes, I confirm I do have this license available. Now take a look at the right-hand side. We can see what our cost is going to be. $105 is the estimated cost. However, it could be hundreds of dollars more. It could even be thousands of dollars more. It just depends on how much you use the server, how much data you put into it, take out of it, and various different applications that you add to it as well. Now, technically, I could just go ahead, review, and create, but I want to do some more customizations. Starting with the size of the disk. Here you can see the disk size is 127 gigabytes, standard for any Hyper-V virtual machine, and then we have the type of storage. So if you take a look, premium SSD is going to be the default. If I go with standard SSD, it's going to be less expensive, and standard hard disk drive is going to be even less expensive than that because it will be slower. Now notice that you also see locally redundant storage. That means that the data is going to be replicated to another server host within a single data center. I'm going to go with the standard SSD. I'd like some speed, but I don't want to pay the extra amount. And then we have the option for key management. So you can choose to manage the keys yourself or allow the platform, which is going to be Azure, to manage the keys. And this has to do with disk encryption, such as with BitLocker. Underneath that, we see the Enable Ultra Disk Compatibility. This is going to provide even faster throughput if you would like to pay extra for that. And if you need additional hard drives, you can choose to create and attach a new disk. This will add a G drive or an F drive, whatever drive letter you'd like to call it, to your storage if you would like to use it. I'm going to click on Networking. By default, it's going to create multiple different network objects. You see a virtual network, which is going to be typically on the 10.000 network, as you see here under subnet, but you can certainly change that to be a different subnet if you'd like. Then a public IP address. It's going to create a public IP address, typically on IPv4, but in some cases you might see an IPv6 address. Then you see the NIC network security group. By default, it's going to be set to basic. And this is a little bit like a firewall or a filter. It's going to allow or block various different IP addresses if you would like to do so. So I could choose advanced if I'd like, and I can create a group that's going to allow various different users to log in, whether it's from a private network or a public network. Now, do I want to allow public inbound ports? By default, it is yes, set to remote desktop 3389. But once again, you can go ahead and change that as you could previously. If you don't check the box for delete public IP and NIC when the VM is deleted, then you'll continue to be charged for those resources. So when you delete the virtual machine, you want to delete those as well, if that's the way you'd like to do it. Another option for increasing speed is accelerated networking. That will be an additional charge. And you can also load balance your virtual machine. If you're choosing to have multiple different virtual machines, this may be a good idea if you have a lot of high traffic. I'm not going to choose that. I'm going to click Next for management. And by default, you're going to see the Enable Basic Plan for free. This is Defender for Cloud. So if you go into Defender for Cloud, you should see this server in there, and you'll see whether or not it's compliant. If you'd like, you can log in with a Microsoft Entra ID account instead of the local username and password that I set up. You'll also need to set up the role-based access control for that user to be able to access it. You can choose to enable auto shutdown so the server will shut down at certain times, and you can also add backup and enable disaster recovery. These all add additional costs. Take a look at Hot Patch. If you enable Hot Patch, it's going to allow you to use auto updating without having to restart the computer. You can also uncheck that if you don't feel that you need it. But in most cases, it's a good idea because you won't have to restart your computer when updates happen. Under orchestration options, this has to do with how updates are applied. You can see that Azure is going to go ahead and take care of this, but you can also choose the manual updates and others if you uncheck other options like the hot patch. And then reboot setting, reboot if required, or you can say to never reboot, so that way you don't have any reboots happen when it's not convenient, and you can do it when you'd like to. Now I'll go on to monitoring. And as you will see in studying for the AZ900, you can enable recommended alert rules. So I'm going to go ahead and check that box. And you can see a new box pops up, and here you can see here's how I'm going to be notified, and here's what's going to be the thresholds. This is going to be important information to have for your exam, such as the CPU is greater than 80%. That's going to trigger an alert. Available memory bytes is less than 1 gigabyte. That's going to be another one. You can see all these different areas are going to trigger alerts, and you can say who it is you would like to have an email when that happens. You can also change this percentage that you see here, and you can add additional ones if you'd like. I'll click Save, and we'll scroll down. You may decide to have application health monitoring. So you could check that option, and then you can see the health monitoring configuration option pop up, which you can then configure. This is also important information for the AZ900 exam. I'll choose the default information and click Save, and now application health monitoring has been turned on, and it will let me know if there's any issues with any of my applications running on this virtual machine. Boot diagnostics has to do with the computer when it's booting up. So if it has any issues with starting, then you're going to get the boot diagnostics in a log file inside the management website for the virtual machine, which you'll see in a little bit. I'm going to click Next for Advanced. Here I can choose to add a virtual machine application to install onto my virtual machine if I'd like. I currently have no application, so I'll just go ahead and go back. You can add that in a different part of Azure. I'm going to scroll down to the bottom. You can add these later if you'd like, such as adding in a host group and capacity reservations. I'm going to move on to tags. Tags are also an important part of the AZ900. This allows you to group your resources into various different names and values. It's really helpful for setting up billing to various different clients or different departments within your organization. And you can have a single resource in multiple different tags if you'd like. So I'll give this a name. I'll call it tag 1. The value is going to be HR, so it gets billed to the HR department. And here you can see the resources that I would like to go ahead and bill. So I'm going to uncheck, select all, and I'll just say, let's just bill HR for the disk and the public IP address, for instance. And I can go ahead and add additional ones if I'd like. I'm going to do Next, Review, and Create. And now I can create my virtual machine. The virtual machine creation usually takes about 5 minutes, and it will let you know when everything's been created. Then we can take a look at the resources and see what resources were created when creating a single virtual machine. You can see that the deployment is in progress, and take a look at all the different resources that were created with just one virtual machine. An IP address, a network security group, a virtual network. All these different areas are created as resources just with this virtual machine. My virtual machine has been created according to the message at the top that you can see here. I'm going to click on Go to Resource, which is going to be my virtual machine that I just created. I'll go ahead and close that message. Look at all the different ways that you can manage your virtual machine. You've got access control and activity log, the tags that were created during the installation. We've got networking changes that can be made, various different ways to connect, lots of different settings here. What I'd like to do is connect using remote desktop because that's what I had set up. So I've got this public IP address that you see here. So I'm going to go ahead and select it, and it opens up my IP information. I'm going to go ahead and copy that IP address, open up remote desktop by going to search box and typing in remote desktop and opening up the remote desktop connection. Now I'm going to paste in the public IP address and connect. Now I need to make sure that I use my WinAdmin name. So I'll go ahead and change the name and the password that was created when the virtual machine was being created. And now it's opening up my newly created virtual machine using remote desktop into Azure. During the creation of this virtual machine, there were a lot of areas that are covered in the AZ900 exam. So make sure that you go back into those areas again if there's any areas that might be confusing or need more clarity, because it's going to definitely help you pass the AZ900. Now we see the standard startup options when you're first starting up a new virtual machine or any Windows Server operating system. And you also see this option to go ahead and try Windows Admin Center and Azure Arc. I'm going to choose to not show that at this time. We will be going over Azure Arc a little bit later on in the course. Now I have the connection complete using remote desktop, and of course I can go ahead and click the Start button and start using Windows Server 2025 in Azure.